Tech censorship. We all know about it, but it's worse than you think. We're going to get into the details with Allum Bokhari right here on the Matt Forney Show. Allum, thanks for coming on the show.
Good to be on.
Now, for people in the audience who don't know who you are, just give a brief overview of yourself, your work, that kind of thing.
So I've been covering online censorship, especially of people on the political right, because they've been the main targets of it for about 8 or 9 years now. I was at Breitbart News for 7 years, and I'm now managing director of the Foundation for Freedom Online. We're a non-profit that tracks online censorship, its causes, its consequences, where it comes from, and how to solve it.
Yeah. I first heard of you during Gamergate. I mean, I don't want to say that's where you got started, but you know, that's where your name became more of a household name.
Yeah. That's accurate. I did get started during Gamergate. I was a mere Twitter anon before that, and that Gamergate, for those who are unaware, it's a very murky topic.
If you were still in middle school when it was going on.
I mean, it's sort of easier to understand in retrospect because there have been so many uprisings against woke culture since then. But that was the first one. That was sort of online gamers fighting against political correctness and sort of ideological bias in their media. So it was in 2014. This was like 2 years into what was called the Great Awakening. So Gamergate starts in 2014, and that is a couple of years into what's become known as the Great Awakening, which is, that massive surge in media interest in topics like sexism and racism and white supremacy and all of this stuff that's saturating the media. And gamers are the first people to stage an uprising against it, an online uprising on this hashtag called Gamergate.
Yes.
And they're just targeting the media, attacking the media over wokeness, and it goes on for months and months, and hundreds of thousands to maybe over 1 million people get involved. It's huge. But like I said, it's easy to understand in retrospect because there have been similar things with Bud Light, with the NFL, sort of consumer backlashes against wokeness. That one, I think, lasted longer and made more of an impact in the popular imagination because it was the first one.
Oh, yeah. Gamergate, I was involved in it to a more limited degree. Gamergate fed into, the first, Trump's first campaign, all of that. That's where it all began. Because just a year before that, that was when we first started getting high profile cancellations. You had Pax Dickinson. There was that woman who worked at OkCupid, I want to say, the whole, Justine, I believe her name was, she made that joke about going to Africa.
Justine Sacco,
yes. Has Justine landed was the hashtag. And, it seemed like very dark times for, free speech. And, a year later, we've got gamers we're not taking this anymore. We've had it. That is where it all starts.
It's sort of where everything starts because I've been looking into this recently. I've been researching. So, today, the biggest threats to free speech come from the people who work as sort of professional disinformation watchdogs. These guys got hundreds of millions of dollars in U.S. taxpayer funding under the previous administration. That's all been shut down now in the current administration. They did it on day one. But if you go back and you read what some of these people were writing in the early 2010s, or the late 2000s. Like Richard Stengel, for example, like he's published a book against disinformation. He was, about the threats of disinformation, about the threats of an uncontrolled, unregulated internet. He was an official in the Biden administration. In 2006, he's, I believe, the managing editor at Time magazine. And that is the year in which Time magazine's person of the year is quote unquote you, the digitally empowered masses. And the whole tone of Time and Richard Stengel back then is, isn't it great that the internet is empowering regular people? Isn't it great that a guy sitting at home with a YouTube account can become a journalist? That's the general tone of what Richard Stengel is writing about in 2006. And it's what a lot of liberal journalists are writing about in the late 2000s and the early 2010s. They're very pro the internet, they're very pro free speech.
Yes.
Because at that point, all digital activism seems to be on their side. It's Occupy Wall Street, it's the campaigns against intellectual property laws, it's the 4chan's uprising against the Church of Scientology, against organized religion, against capitalism. It seems that digital activism is a very left-wing thing. And Gamergate is sort of the first time when it's not a left-wing thing.
Yes.
And this is that's why it's a major point in sort of souring the opinion of liberal journalists about online free speech.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I remember during the 2004 campaign, the consensus among a lot of liberals was that the right used the internet way more effectively during that presidential campaign. They named as an example the Swift Boat Veterans for Truth. That was an online thing that had a major impact on John Kerry's presidential campaign, and their mentality was like, we need to get online to counter. They weren't using the term disinfo back then. They're just, we need to counter the right wing online. And 4 years later, Obama was very much an online phenomenon. So as you said, they were very pro free speech. But after 2012, Obama won a second term. It became about shutting it down. Through public cancellation attempts, and as it later devolved into outright censorship on major tech platforms.
Yeah, and obviously Trump is the biggest turning point. That's when the whole of society, businesses, NGOs, nonprofits, universities, the deep state in Washington D.C., they all decide, they all go into panic mode, and they point the finger at Facebook and say, it was Facebook's fault that Trump won, and we have to clamp down on fake news, we have to clamp down on disinformation. And, so many of these, actually government-funded entities will be quite open about saying, well, 2016 was the turning point.
And it's key to point out that, as you said, a lot of these people talking about disinfo in the 2010s ended up becoming government officials in the Biden administration. Another example that comes to mind is Kristen Clark. In 2018, she was the head of some civil rights advocacy organization, and she successfully got GoDaddy to deplatform Richard Spencer's website, altright.com. And 3 years later, she became the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights under the Biden administration, which is the same position that Harmeet Dillon has now. So don't tell me that elections don't matter.
Elections absolutely matter. I mean, one of the day one executive orders that Donald Trump signed, and this was heavily influenced by the research we did at the Foundation for Freedom Online, was executive order called Ending Federal Censorship. And that pretty much says, well, the U.S. government is not going to fund efforts to tackle to shut down free speech on the internet under the guise of combating disinformation. And that's completely cut off the flow of federal dollars to all of these pro-censorship people and institutions.
Yeah. The mechanism of censorship is much more complex in the U.S. because we have the First Amendment. So, formally, the government cannot shut down your speech. Now, I've lived in Europe. European governments are, if you're more likely to get prosecuted for hate speech in places like that. Well, it varies based on country. I lived in Hungary for a while, and there was a case of a Holocaust denier going around. And eventually the police did show up at his house, and they just said, basically, look, we really don't want to arrest you. Could you just shut the fuck up? And he shut the fuck up. But in Britain, France, Germany, we've got so many high profile cases of right-wing dissidents, being arrested, being surveilled by the government, being deplatformed. But in the U.S., what the Biden administration did, what the Democrats did when they were in power, was to sort of outsource it to, these organizations and outsource it to social media platforms. We've heard all the refrain. oh, you have freedom of speech, but you don't have freedom from consequences, And Twitter, Facebook, they're private entities. They don't have to give you your speech. Censorship is only when the government does it. But as we found out, it's the government acting through proxies to pressure these platforms into deplatforming people.
Yeah, that's right. So what the US government can't do is pass a law saying disinformation is banned on social media. What they can do is pour hundreds of millions of dollars into a labyrinth of organizations whose sole purpose is to raise awareness and research quote unquote disinformation, and that then goes to the media and provides this inexorable source of pressure on the tech companies through their advertisers, through negative headlines to censor people. So the government does it that way in the US. The other way they do it, I will say, you mentioned, and this is like a threat today as well. So, Trump might have shut down a lot of the domestic side of censorship. But a lot of what these US government-funded anti-disinformation organizations did is they also encouraged the rise of censorship laws in the European Union, in Brazil, in the UK, in Canada. So the European Union Digital Services Act is their new piece of online regulation that regulates disinformation and hate speech across the entire European Union. And that's been used to fine X over $140 million because because X didn't allow access to its platform to disinformation researchers. And that piece of regulation was encouraged, and it's still I'll start again. So that piece of European legislation was lobbied for by many organizations that received U.S. government funding.
Oh yes, it's all interconnected.
It's all interconnected, yeah.
And I remember, I think it was in 2019 that some of these laws were being proposed or passed. And I remember a lot of Americans online who were like, the Europeans, you're not even going to be allowed to post memes anymore. America number one. But here's the thing, number one, you point out that it was through these these U.S. funded organizations. But number two, the European Union is a big market for this. It's 450 million people, probably less now after Brexit, but it's a huge wealthy market that's very online. Twitter, Facebook, etc. They're not going to block off the European Union and lose all that money. They're not going to create separate systems for European users and the rest of the world. So what they do is they just impose the European restrictions on everyone else. A lot of the censorship we see on social media is the direct result of these laws in other countries being imposed on Americans just because it's less effort to have separate systems for everyone else.
Yeah, so a lot of the disinformation guys who are in the US see these European regulations as a way to regulate speech in the US, because like you said, you have to consider the economics for the social media platforms. It's easier to have a uniform content moderation strategy that satisfies the Europeans, but also bans people in the US. Ultimately, it's going to be the same systems. Where if there wasn't a Digital Services Act, if there was free speech in the European Union, in the UK, in Canada, Australia, there'd be much less urgency behind the need to have, a large content moderation team. And if you look at what the disinformation researchers actually say themselves on online panels, you go back to 2023, 2024, you'll see people from the National Endowment for Democracy, which is a big US government-funded organization, talking about how, the disinformation, the Digital Services Act will ensure that companies like Facebook and Twitter will have to retain their content moderation teams, even though Elon Musk wants to shut them down.
Oh yeah. There's been stuff about threatening to because this has happened to smaller entities like Gab. I remember Gab got blasted off of both the Apple and the Google store because they didn't have a block button. They invent any kind of excuse they can to throttle these platforms. Twitter, X is obviously in the crosshairs right now because it's Elon Musk purchasing X back in what was Twitter back in 2022 really was a game changer for a lot of people because it's much freer now. I mean, you can still get censored, banned for various things, but I was banned off of Twitter for 8 years under my real name. I had other accounts out, obviously. An entire culture developed around people getting banned and respawning on various accounts.
Yeah,
Help me
yeah.
find my friends. Stuff like that. All that's gone now. Like we can speak much more freely, and I believe that was a game changer in the 2024 election because the media can no longer control the narrative or control what was being put out on social media.
It certainly was, and yeah, there was that dark period, the height of censorship in around 2020 to 2022, when so many people were getting banned, and that was the heyday of Telegram. Like people get banned on Twitter, and then they'd make Telegram accounts. So that was one of the only ways you could follow people was through their Telegram channels or through Gab, as you said. Those are the only two serious free speech platforms. It has improved today. But as you said, they're still when we say they, we're talking about the U.S. deep state in exile, essentially under the Trump administration, and their allies in places like Europe and the UK, and the Brazilian judiciary, which has also gone after X. They're all allies. So there's this global blob of disinformation experts and counter-disinformation officials who are really all come from the U.S. deep state. Like they originate with U.S. government funding, but they're still out there. They're still working with these foreign governments. And like I said, they're looking for any excuse. So it's very important whenever you hear a politician in Europe or in the UK or any of these places saying we need to regulate the tech platforms, they're getting very clever about it. So recently there's been this controversy with Grok and the bikini photos.
Oh yeah.
And this and the UK has people have been asking Grok to put women in bikinis, without their consent, and it's an issue, right? It is an issue, but the UK used that as an excuse to go to Australia and Canada and say we should do a joint ban on X, which is completely ban X from all of our countries, and that's like way over the. Like you could have solved the issue without threatening to ban the company. They want to ban the company not because of that issue, but because they see it as a threat to their political power.
Yeah, they're just using it as a scapegoat.
Yeah. And the key thing is, you look at other AI models, Gemini, ChatGPT. You put the same prompts in, the bikini prompt, and it will do exactly the same thing. But those companies are not being threatened with a ban in the UK, Australia, and Canada because those companies are not seen as big of a threat to the political establishment there as X is.
Yeah.
So you always got to interrogate the excuse.
The biggest thing I've noticed, people are talking about this as well, is the destruction of anonymity by this is being trialed out with Pornhub. Now, I'm not going to defend porn. Porn is gross. Don't watch porn. But like here in Texas, Pornhub is blocked because of they're implementing laws that require the users of these sites to submit their real identities, their real IDs, and they're trialing it with Pornhub because everyone hates Pornhub. No one wants to defend porn, but they want to implement this for everything, basically, social media. They want you to not be able to log onto the internet, log onto X without having to dox yourself. And beyond this being a major data security risk, I've gone into various Indian scams and whatnot. Your information can be stolen. Again, you can no longer post anonymously, which a lot of people need to do that, simply because they've got jobs, families to protect. That's a right under the under the First Amendment. You don't have to attach your name to things you say, and the founders published a lot of their stuff anonymously out of fear of British reprisal. And that is a major, major struggle. That is something that Bronze Age Pervert was pointing out years ago. It's like we could end up in a situation where social media is free, but you have to attach your real name to everything, which will effectively make it not free if you're in a situation where you can't speak freely because of your job or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, online anonymity is so important. We were talking about Gamergate before. I grew up as a teenager in anonymous online gamer lobbies, and sort of my entire political career, I suppose, has been trying to restore the kind of freedom of speech and disregard for political correctness that existed in those forums. The Call of Duty the infamous Call of Duty Modern Warfare lobby. So online anonymity is super important. You're right, combating porn, child safety, these are being used as tools to just one, destroy anonymity, and two, to undermine free speech. It's very important that people on the right, I think, draft their own child safety legislation for the internet, because if you let the establishment do it, they're just going to use it as a Trojan horse for censorship. They're going to use it as a Trojan horse to kill anonymity. You see this in the UK. The UK passed the Online Safety Act last year, their version of the EU's Digital Services Act. And there's tons of stuff in there about, platforms have to suppress disinformation. It has incredibly draconian powers, like not only to force platforms to take down content, but also to force the business partners of platforms, like the web hosting providers, their payment processors, their advertisers, to cut them off. So even if you have a tech company that's resisting them, they can just go to the weakest link in their tech stack and get them deplatformed that way. But the way the Online Safety Act was promoted to the public was, this is a child safety bill. That's it. Like they didn't mention in all the interviews that government ministers gave in public about the bill, they didn't mention the disinformation stuff. They didn't mention the hate speech stuff, because they know that's controversial. That would turn people against the bill. They only mentioned the child safety.
Yes,
stuff.
they always trial this stuff either by selling it as a child safety, as you gave that example, or they will target someone or something that everyone hates. Like I said, they're doing it with Pornhub because everyone hates porn.
Well, terrorism is another example. So recently there was the Bondi Beach attack in Australia, right?
Yes,
and the Australian government immediately rushed out new legislation to deal with extremism. And it was incredible how fast it happened, because we've seen examples in the past where war on terror powers from the 2000s have been used to go after the right.
Yes.
We saw that a lot after 2016, but there was a bit of a delay in between that. So, the war on terror legislation comes out in the early 2000s. It starts being used against the right in a serious way more than 10 years later. In Australia, they passed this new bill right after the Bondi Beach attack, and it's immediately used to shut down right-wing political groups.
Yeah.
So you get an Islamic extremist attack. They rush out new powers for the government, and those powers are immediately turned on the political right. So it's so obvious how they use these excuses that everyone agrees with. We need to protect kids. We need to fight Islamic terrorists, and then they use it to target their political opponents.
Yeah. We saw this in real time after Charlottesville in 2017. Like a lot of alt-right people, even people who had no association with like what went down there, they got banned from PayPal, debanked, banned off of social media. I mean, one example, Andrew Anglin of the Daily Stormer, he was, he had his URL straight up stolen from him. And at the time, nobody defended him because, like, well, he's a neo-Nazi, who cares? But then that same mechanism of censorship gets deployed against more mainstream people. They started going after Alex Jones the following year. Eventually, in the last days of his first term, Trump was deplatformed everywhere. Like, they start with someone that everyone hates, and then they just escalate it up until, people that you like, people who are not that controversial, I don't think, end up in the crosshairs. So it's important, I believe, that when this starts happening, to just call it out, because again, if you could hate porn or whoever, but they are going to ratchet it up to something that's actually important, as you've pointed out with terrorism, whatever. It all gets deployed against the right.
That's right, yeah. And the other way to do it is, the right gets involved in this stuff themselves. I mean, you can draft, a child safety bill for the internet that doesn't also include measures to combat disinformation and hate speech. And I think hopefully the next Reform government does that in the UK, because they've pledged to rip up the Online Safety Act, which is great. They should probably have their own child safety bill that doesn't have anything about disinformation or hate speech or anything like that.
Yeah,
because then you take that away as a potential Trojan horse for the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. And another way to look at it is they've deployed the whole, well, these are private entities, they can do what they want. Well, number one, a lot of tech and social media was funded or connected by the government. We know how the internet itself came about as a ARPANET, the DARPA project in the 60s. But number two, these corporations have steadily been monopolizing the internet. Like I can remember back, 15 years ago, the internet was largely, independent sites. People were reading blogs, on Blogspot or on custom URLs. Social media was just getting started. It was very decentralized. You could go to Google and search out all kinds of stuff. Now, the internet is basically been reduced effectively to a handful of sites: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Substack. If you have an independent website, unless you're like mega huge, like my own website has been buried by Google search results for many years now. So they deliberately work to centralize all discourse, all commerce on these sites, and then they start banning people. It's almost a public square argument.
It certainly is, and the impact it has on elections as well is very, very important. I mean, one of the things that Google did when I was working for Breitbart News, one of the things that Google did in the 2020 election was they completely cut off all search, almost all search traffic. Similarly to your site, almost all search traffic to Breitbart News was cut off in 2020.
Yeah, they've done that. They've done that to Unz, Ron Unz. They've done that to a ton of people. So that, like, when you search for a topic, you're only going to get mainstream approved sources. And also to deconstruct the argument of like, well, it's you have freedom of speech, but not freedom of consequences, which was literally refuted by John Stuart Mill about 150 years ago in On Liberty, as he pointed out. Freedom of speech is to protect minority opinions, because like you could walk down the street in China and no one will arrest you for saying Xi Jinping is great. I love Xi Jinping. He's so incredible. A majority opinion does not need to be protected because by definition, the majority of people agree with it. It's the opinions that are unpopular, the opinions that are controversial, that are the reason why we have freedom of speech.
Yeah, the freedom of consequence argument is, I mean, you can understand it a little bit, but it doesn't really make sense because it's normally contrasted with like, okay, if the government punishes you for speech, that's censorship. But if there are private sector consequences, then it's not. But that doesn't make sense at all. So like, in the UK, you can get fined. I think there was a YouTuber, Count Dankula, who was fined by the UK government about £800 because of a joke video in which
that's the one where his pug did a salute.
His pug did a Nazi salute as a joke. He trained his pug to do that, and then the UK government prosecuted him and fined him. I think it was like around £800 for hate speech. But when you think about it, £800 is nowhere near as damaging as losing your YouTube account. Losing your Twitter account if you're an online influencer, or if you even just run an online business. So much of commerce is online right now. So if you get cut off from these platforms, that's going to affect your livelihood, probably way more than an £800 fine.
Yeah.
So the consequences of the government punishing you for free speech can oftentimes be less severe than the consequences of the private sector punishing you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've lost. I got banned from Twitter all the way back in 2015. And I respawned, and then I got banned again. And there was actually a point where I had like an alt account, and then some woman complained who worked at Huffington Post directly complained to someone who worked at Twitter. Oh, Matt Forney's still on here. He's ban evading, and that account got banned within the hour. That caused it caused a major drop in my public visibility, because I remember meeting with some friends in Guadalajara when I moved there in 2021. One of them posts on his Instagram was like, wait, that's Matt Forney? I haven't heard about him in years. Yeah, because I got banned from everywhere. It's absolutely damaging, particularly when we move into the realm of banking. If you're banned from PayPal or these other services, well, PayPal has kind of been supplanted by Venmo, but they're owned by the same company. If you have to move to crypto, way fewer people will purchase things via crypto. It's still more of a niche thing. So your income goes way, way down. Again, you can see the effects of people who like Anglin, who have been mega banned and are barely able to keep the lights on, or something like Kiwi Farms, where they've been banned from services like Cloudflare. They basically have to run everything themselves, which, if you're with a DDoS mitigation, doing that yourself, if you're a site that's constantly being under threat of a DDoS, can run you like 5 figures per month. Losing these services through deplatforming, not only trying to reduces your income, but in many cases it also shoots your expenses way, way up.
Mm-hmm.
And makes it financially unviable to continue.
Yeah, and you compare it to the physical economy. So if you're running a physical business and you have a physical location, and your business landlord kicks you out of that physical location for a spurious reason, there are all sorts of legal protections against that. You can sue your landlord, for kicking you out of your business location for no good reason. But if you're kicked off, if you run an online business and you're kicked off a platform, you have no such legal protections. There's no due process, no legal recourse whatsoever.
They can do some insane things to you. Like people who've been banned from PayPal, like any money you have in the PayPal account, they will hold it for the next 6 months while you're banned. So you can have like, I don't know, thousands of dollars there that you're counting on to pay bills, but you won't get it until 6 months after the ban.
Yeah, and things have gotten better on the online censorship front, but we're sort of fighting to defeat anti-disinformation laws. We're fighting to defeat anti-hate speech laws abroad. We're fighting to defeat this huge labyrinth of counter-disinformation professionals that was funded with a massive fire hose of U.S. taxpayer money between 2017 and 2024. But defeating that is that's good. But there's still no, even if you defeat that, what we should have actually is laws that protect you from deplatforming rather than encourage it.
Yeah. There should be, you should have legal protections again, like compared to the landlord situation. You can't be booted off these platforms unless you're blatantly doing illegal things.
Yeah,
like you're advocating terrorism or whatever. Like that I think would be that is the ideal situation to get to. I mean, as you said, it's improved. Do you see the outlook for free speech online? Do you see that going in a positive direction? Because you've mentioned all these things that are still going on in these other countries.
Mm-hmm.
How do you view things going forward?
I mean, I think we're still ultimately playing defense. We got to dismantle the worldwide disinformation complex, which is no small feat, especially when they're so deeply entrenched now in the regulatory mechanisms of the European Union, in the Brazilian judiciary, in the UK, Australia, Canada. The Trump administration could fight this through trade policy, through trade negotiations. They're certainly...
Well, they are doing it to a certain extent. I believe that one official who had threatened Elon Musk is now sanctioned.
Yes, that's true. They are sanctioning officials that are being involved in online censorship, and that's huge. It's a meaningful consequence to impose on these people. The CEO of the Center for Countering Digital Hate, which is a terrible censorship organization in the UK, has also been banned from the US, got their visa revoked because of their involvement in censorship. So these are positive things. To really force the European Union to give up the DSA, that would have to be a red line in trade negotiations, which is a difficult thing to do because the EU probably considers that act to be a huge priority for them.
Oh yeah. Well, I have hope for the future. Never black pill, but always chimp. As I've pointed out before. Allum, where can people follow your work if they want to learn more about you and keep up with what you're doing?
Yeah, you can find me on X at Allum Bokhari, and you can follow our work at the foundationforfreedomonline.com. We publish regular reports on the latest goings on in the censorship industry.
Awesome. Thank you again for coming on the show, Allum.
Thanks, Matt. Good to be on.
Illegitimize non-carborundum. Don't let the bastards grind you down. I'm Matt Forney with Allum Bokhari, and we are out.